Coming up, I'll talk about this strange phenomenon of debanking. I'll give you the details of how the Biden-Harris regime, with the help of Senator Elizabeth Warren and others, debanked technology entrepreneurs and political opponents, including, well, moi. Kari Lake comes on. She's going to talk to me about Arizona, but also about her own hopes and expectations for the Trump administration and her plans going forward. Hey, if you're watching on YouTube or Rumble or listening on Apple, Google, or Spotify, please subscribe to my channel. This is the Dinesh D'Souza podcast.
America needs this voice. The times are crazy. In a time of confusion, division, and lies, we need a brave voice of reason, understanding, and truth. This is the Dinesh D'Souza podcast.
We have all learned over the past 4 years about many abusive and tyrannical policies and practices by the Biden-Harris regime. In so many areas, they have been trampling on our rights. Now, some of this began under the pretext of COVID, and you saw there were restrictions even in the Trump era at the very end, but Biden and Harris took this to a whole new level. And I'm talking here about firing of government workers, pressuring companies to force people to take the vaccine. You know about the regime of censorship that was imposed through digital media on people who disagreed about the origins of COVID or the efficacy of the vaccine. So there was the COVID crackdown. But above and beyond that, there were the abuses of the police state, most of them, of course, presented in my film, Police State. And in it, we covered systematic censorship, mass surveillance, the criminalization of political differences, of course, the effort to go after Trump, the lawfare against Trump, but also the way that they went after the January 6th protesters, the way they went after people in the name of the so-called FACE Act, the way that they targeted parents at school board meetings. This is all familiar territory. But I want to talk about something that has been disclosed recently, and that is the issue of debanking. Debanking. Now, what does debanking mean? It means closing your bank account. It means trying to cut you off from the ability to function in the banking system. It means trying to deprive you of your access to credit. And this can be done to individuals. In fact, as I'll point out in a moment, it was done to me. But it can also be done to your company. You're trying to start a new company. You're trying to get access to capital and credit. And boom, they cut you off because they want to prevent you from doing so. Now, the way that this debanking issue broke out is that one of the internet early pioneers, Mark Andreessen, this is a guy who was involved with Netscape. He is one of the heroes of the early internet and a very smart guy. He was on Joe Rogan's show, and they were covering some of the usual topics about Trump and so on. And Andreessen was one of the Silicon Valley guys that supported Trump. But in the course of this conversation, he disclosed that a number of the internet pioneers and a number of new people starting new technology companies have been targeted by the Biden-Harris regime. And this includes, by the way, people involved with artificial intelligence and AI companies. And basically what the Biden people are trying to do is control these people. And so if you don't go along with them, what do? They debank you. Now, this may seem a little crazy. How do you go about debanking someone? Well, as it turns out, they were doing it through a system called Operation Choke Point. And what does Operation Choke Point refer to? It refers to a kind of alliance. It's an alliance that involves the White House. It involves the SEC, or the Securities and Exchange Commission. It involves the Treasury Department. It involves the FDIC. It involves powerful people in the Senate, named particularly two that I will mention. It involves the Federal Reserve. And all these people work in concert, and they can strike at you in many different ways. They can strike at you by going directly to your bank and saying, debank this guy. Or they can strike at you by cutting off your credit. They will send a threatening letter to Visa and tell Visa, listen, you need to take another look. They don't necessarily say, deprive this guy of being able to use Visa. You may want to take another look at this company, or take another look at this guy. And so this is a way of hinting, hey, Visa, if you don't want us to be investigating you, if you don't want us to be bringing cases against you, if you don't want us to fine you or harass you in all the many ways that government is capable of doing, since government controls the not only the financial apparatus. I mean, let's remember, banks are by and large under the control of the government. They will do what the government says. If you think of the Federal Reserve, it is a kind of giant, you can say, master ledger. It is the bank of all banks. And then think of all the individual banks as being separate ledgers, subordinate ledgers, banks that answer to the Federal Reserve and rely on the Federal Reserve to set interest rates, expand or contract the availability of credit. So this is how our system works. And so this kind of melange that I mentioned, I'm thinking here particularly of the SEC, for example, the Securities and Exchange Commission. I'm thinking of the Treasury Department. The FDIC, of course, is the insurer of banks, right? When people say if you open up a bank account, the bank account is insured to $250,000. Who does that? The FDIC. And the two senators I have in mind are Elizabeth Warren and Sherrod Brown, both Democrats. Warren, of course, from Massachusetts, Sherrod Brown from Ohio. This is the constellation of bullies. These are the people who bring about the debanking transactions. And the debanking is against tech companies that won't play along, AI that the Biden administration wants to control. And if they can't control it, they're like, let's torpedo this guy, let's torpedo that guy. And there are now, since Mark Andreessen talked about it on the Rogan show, there are now many of these entrepreneurs coming out and saying, yeah, I was debanked, and this is how it happened to me. And yeah, I was debanked, and this is how it happened to my company. Now, interestingly, when these people were debanked in the beginning, they never said a word. And I think they never said a word because they figured that if they speak out about it, other banks are going to be scared to let them open up a bank account. You need to bank somewhere. And if you can't get banked at Bank of America, you're going to go try, for example, at Wells Fargo Bank or someplace else. And so if you step out and say that, I'm on the government's hit list and I've been debanked by Visa, chances are that MasterCard or American Express may go, well, we don't really want to be giving credit cards to this guy. And suddenly you find yourself outside the banking system. I mean, just try to imagine what it's like to function in America when you are not in the banking system. Now, frankly, I've never been outside the banking system, but I want to describe something that happened to me that I think is very revealing of this phenomenon. And by the way, shows that in my case, I wasn't starting a tech company. I'm not I wasn't a crypto entrepreneur, but I was and am a kind of political dissident. I'm not on the list of favorites of the Obama administration or the Biden-Harris administration. So this happened to me a few years ago. I mosey into Chase Bank, and I lived at the time in California, in the San Diego area. And the people at Chase, the local branch, by the way, I knew people there. I was often in the bank. Debbie knows I'm a little bit of a show up at the bank. Debbie goes, you can deposit checks these days electronically, but no, I like to show up in person, even if the check is for like $10. and so I'm actually a rather well-known figure in the bank. Hi, Dinesh. And so I walk into my local branch where I'm a good customer and I'm known. And they tell me, we don't really understand, but your account's been closed. And I go, well, who closed it? They go, well, we did. And I go, well, who did? You? And they're like, no, not us. They go, there was a notation in your file coming from the highest levels, coming from the head office to close your account. And I go, well, why don't you call them up and find out what the reason is? And so there were many efforts made to find out what the reason was, but no reason could ever be found. No reason was given. No reason is available. The people who made that decision essentially said, we're not telling why. We're not giving any reason. Your account is simply closed. You have to bank elsewhere. So kind of a little bit of a shock to me. Now, it happened to me in the case of just this one bank, Chase, but it happened to me kind of a second time, and this was a year or two later when I just got a United.
This was last year.
Oh, Debbie said, reminds me, this was last year. I got a United card. United was, peddling one of their credit cards. I'm like, okay, I'll get one. And so I did. And what I didn't realize was that the United card was a Visa card operated by Chase. So I must still be on the Chase, most wanted list or the hit list or whatever, because I tried to use my card, declined. And I'm like, declined? I just got the card. It's completely fine. It's not like I've used up my credit. And they were like, no, you're not, your card doesn't work. And then when I called Visa, they go, very sorry, but your card has been canceled. No reason given or available. So this is debanking. And think about it. If you can do this to a private citizen, it shows you the power of the government to go after its opponents. Even if you were to say, well, Dinesh, you were convicted, you're a convicted felon. Well, first of all, even if that was the case, I've been pardoned, and so I've been restored all my rights. There's absolutely no indication I pose any kind of banking risk. And then today I see some guy on the left, and he's like, well, a lot of these tech entrepreneurs have a meth business on the side, and so maybe that's the reason they were debanked, is because of their meth business. And so I'm like, dude, first of all, there are a number of us, General Flynn, so many political opponents who have been debanked. And so, can you give us the names of which of us is running a meth business? If that's your plausible reason for why this is happening, no, that's not the reason. What you have here is an effort to establish the levers of economic control, and using the weaponry of government, because the banks aren't making these decisions by themselves. They're making the decision because they are terrified of the government. They are extensions of the government. They know the power that the government has over them, a power that is being grossly abused. And so this debanking is the latest chapter of the malevolence and the tyrannical actions of the Biden regime. And I'd like to see a lot of heads roll in this particular area. As we uncover all the bad stuff that this government has been doing to us, this is one area in which we should all demand accountability. I got to make a small confession about my diet in December, and I've got to word it carefully because, after all, Debbie's in the room and listening. This is, in fact, kind of the worst month of the year in terms of eating right, and I know I'm going to find myself, stuffing a few treats and meats and dishes into my mouth, leaving very little room for the right stuff. Now, of course, this won't be entirely easy because Debbie's going to be on my case, but I want you to know I have my ways.
Oh, really?
I'm not going to be going too crazy, but I do intend to lighten up. However, I will protect my health by taking this Balance of Nature, fruits and veggies in a capsule every single day. Balance of Nature is made from whole fruit and veggie ingredients, and I'm not going to skip taking those daily supplements. It's the one thing I'm going to get right because feeling good is important to me, especially in December. So join me in pushing back against the dreaded December diet crash. Get Balance of Nature today. Use my discount code, it's America. Sign up as a new customer. You get 50% off plus free shipping and their money-back guarantee. This is a really amazing December discount, but you got to use my discount code, which is America. Call them, 800-246-8751. Again, it's 800-246-8751, or you can go to balanceofnature.com. When you use discount code America, you get 50% off plus free shipping. Are you feeling overwhelmed by the increasing cost of health insurance? Have you had enough of not having control over your healthcare dollars? Introducing ShareRight. It's healthcare done the right way. At ShareRight, you're not just a number, you're part of a caring community. And forget about paying excessive premiums. With ShareRight, you stand to save 30 to 50% compared to health insurance. So think about what you could do with all those savings. But it's more than just savings. ShareRight ensures you have access to the care you deserve precisely when you need it, from routine checkups to unexpected emergencies. With ShareRight, your healthcare is their top priority. Empower yourself today. Take control of your healthcare costs. Visit shareright.org/Dinesh to learn more. See how much you can save. Visit shareright.org/Dinesh. That's shareright.org/Dinesh for healthcare done the right way. Guys, I'm delighted to welcome back to the podcast my friend Kari Lake. Kari Lake really needs no introduction, but you know her as the stalwart candidate for governor of Arizona in 2022, the Senate in Arizona this time around 2024. Her website is karilake.com. You can follow her on X at Kari, Kari Lake. Kari, welcome. Thank you for joining me. This does seem, doesn't it, to be a turning point in American history. We have, for the first time, it seems like we've swept the House, the Senate, the presidency. We have a fairly decent majority at the Supreme Court. And yet, I know there are a lot of people all around the country who have been rooting for you, who genuinely believe that you won the last time around. The governorship was stolen from you. You now run for the Senate. You're leading in the race. Somehow, in a kind of last-minute switch, you lose narrowly. And the question I think people are asking is has the problem of election manipulation, election fraud, kind of unleveling the playing field, various types of shenanigans, it doesn't seem like that problem has entirely gone away. Do you agree with that? And moreover, what do you think needs to be done to get at this problem from the root?
Well, first of all, let me say I'm ecstatic that President Trump won this election. I feel that we are at a turning point. We're going to be able to save our country now. We've got hope to save our country in the form of a fighter who's been fighting for us when he didn't have to. And he's continued to fight for our rights, for our Constitution, and took a lot of hits for us. And so I'm ecstatic that President Trump's going to be in the White House, and he's assembling a great team around him. You didn't have to look far to realize, though, that our elections are still not where they need to be. I mean, look at California. I think they're still counting, and we're watching some races where they are just a staunchly red area that if they count, they keep finding more votes for the Democrats. Oh, suddenly, all of a sudden, the Republican isn't winning, and they announce the Democrat has won in congressional seats. I think we should have picked up more congressional seats. If our elections would have been on the up and up around this country, we could have picked up more Senate seats if we didn't have states that counted for 10, 12, 20, 30 days. I mean, this is just a recipe for malfeasance, and we got to fix it. And, you know, the thing that gives me hope right now, I'm disappointed in how many of these races, including my own, went, because I think it's really not the way our founders imagined election would go, where they last for a month and you vote for a month and you count for a month. I mean, this is just crazy stuff. And so I'm upset with that, but it also shines the spotlight on what is really happening. More and more people are waking up to the fact that we must tackle elections, and we must hold people who have committed fraud. We must hold them accountable. But more importantly, and as importantly, we need to reform them so that we have election day on paper ballots, get rid of the machines, we vote in small precincts, and we count right there on election night, and we have the answer to who won. We cannot be dragging out elections for 2 months. So I'm hopeful that President Trump, with some of his cabinet picks and some of his appointments, that they're going to get very serious about elections and election integrity. You know, Dinesh, he put out several warnings on his Truth Social page and on Twitter, basically saying, cease, do not steal this, do not be involved in fraud, do not do anything that is illegal, because we're watching you. And I'm hoping that he's going to stand up and live up to those words.
Kari, there's another aspect of this that I think does need to be brought up, even though it is a little bit of a sore point inside the Republican Party, and that is the allocation of money from the national level to races like yours? I mean, we know that the National Party put giant amount of funding, for example, into Larry Hogan and the Maryland race, which Hogan actually lost pretty decisively. You had an excellent chance in Arizona. Hovde had an excellent chance in Wisconsin. I hear that the McConnell people put zero funding into Ted Cruz's race, and even though Ted Cruz ended up winning it pretty handily, he was running almost neck and neck in the polls. So there was the prospect of losing a Texas Senate seat during that campaign. Can you talk a little bit about how much money the National Party put into your race? Because I want people to realize that is also a process that needs to be reformed.
Well, the National Party is different from McConnell's PAC, which is basically, I don't know if you call it a PAC, actually, his group, which has $400 million that they spend to try to regain the majority. And $400 million is a ton of money. It could go a long way. We could have used some of that. They didn't give any to Blake Masters when he ran. Last go around, they didn't give any to me. They didn't give any to Ted Cruz, but yet they poured in, I heard, 39 million into Maryland. I mean, we could have used even a couple of million, would have helped us immensely. So, that's something that the Senate Leadership Fund will have to answer to, why they didn't do that. Some people have said, hey, they just want 51 seats. They don't want 57 or 58, because with 51, they're able to make all these compromise deals with the Democrats. But what really happens when they call them compromise deals is we give up everything and the Democrats get everything they want. And so I'm disappointed in that. The RNC, I guess, is what you'd call the National Party. And I don't believe that they gave us any money, but I'm not sure that they typically do in Senate races. They provide some support on the ground, which is important. And I hope that the RNC will continue to look into and push for election integrity and real election integrity, like really getting down to who's behind maneuvering and making sure that these elections go the Democrats' way, not the Republicans' way. I'm hoping that they take that very seriously, because I know that they were fighting in Pennsylvania to make sure that McCormick was able to keep and hold on to his win. But I'm not sure that they were fighting in places like Arizona as much and in Nevada. And I think that we really need people to be fighting in all of these states.
Kari, what's your take on these Trump appointees? It looks like Trump has now maybe not completed the slate, but is close to completing the slate on his cabinet appointments. It seems clear to me that these appointments have a completely different feel to the appointments of, say, 2016. In other words, Trump has come kind of a long way in thinking about who are the kinds of people he wants in government. And just from the massive freakout that you're seeing on the left, it seems pretty clear that they are very worried that Trump has now a team of appointees who are going to not only take the country in a different direction, but hold some of these scoundrels accountable for what they have been doing to us over the past 4 years. Do you share my enthusiasm on the whole about the Trump appointments? And which picks are your favorites?
I really do. I think he's doing a great job. I'm amazed, Dinesh, at how everyone is just scrutinizing everything. I mean, even people in our movement, in the MAGA movement, are scrutinizing every single pick, and you're watching liberals' heads, explode over some of these choices that he's picked. I mean, Matt Gaetz, I actually was excited about Matt Gaetz. So when Matt decided to step away, I think that Pam Bondi is going to be incredible as well. We've got people, my favorite of all, you're not going to be surprised, is Tom Homan. Tom Homan as border czar. Tom Homan as border czar is going to be incredibly powerful. He's already explaining what's going to happen. We have to remove people. We know there's hundreds of thousands of criminals who've poured into our country. The deportation that he's talking about and how they're going to maneuver their way through that is incredible. He's a strong man, and he's going to do what he says he's going to do, unlike our previous border czar, Kamala Harris, who actually created the crisis at the border and then did nothing about it except sat there and watched as millions of people poured across. So I'm excited about that. I'm thrilled about Kash Patel. Kash is not only a friend, he's a fighter. He knows who's who in Washington, D.C. He knows what's up. He knows who's been harassing President Trump. He knows who's been acting in a criminal way in D.C. And I think he's going to help level the playing field there when it comes to running the FBI, making sure they get back to what they're supposed to do, which is fighting crime and solving crimes, and not going after people and knocking at the doors of people and harassing people and carting them off to jail for showing up to protest or exercise their First Amendment rights. So I'm excited about that. I think some of the great Besant is a great pick. I'm really excited about Russ Vought. I think Russ Vought running OMB is going to be exactly what we need when it comes to figuring out the budget and what money is needed where. And I'm also excited about Doge, DOGE, with Elon Musk and my friend Vivek Ramaswamy. I can't even, if I had to pick two people to run that, there are not two better people than Vivek and Elon to start to weed out the waste. And there's a lot of it in our federal government, to start to slash the regulations. And I love how Elon said, get rid of all the regulations and then we can add back the ones we need. That shows you how many onerous regulations, unconstitutional regulations that we have that are just suffocating us as Americans, suffocating our rights, making it hard for businesses to expand and grow and do well. And so I like the way he's saying, hey, let's just get rid of all of them and then we'll add back the ones that we need, because there's so much outrageous, as I said, onerous regulations that are hurting us and that have been enacted upon us by bureaucrats in the federal government who don't have the right to do it.
Yeah, I mean, I think, Kari, one of the things, and I think Vivek has stressed this, is that a number of these agencies have no proper authorization. They are just spin-offs of things that have developed. They make their own rules. They then just enforce them against the banks, or they enforce them against the retail sector. In other words, they're bureaucrats who are unaccountable to anyone. And I think Vivek understands that it may be that in some of these cases, you don't just take out the bureaucrats, you might be able to take out the whole agency. When you begin to look at its underlying legal foundation, you realize there is none. So you're looking, it seems, for some dramatic change here. Yeah. Guys, when we come back, I want to talk further with Kari Lake about the Trump appointees and what we can look forward to over the next 4 years. MyPillow is excited to announce that the MyPillow Christmas Extravaganza is finally here. Get this season's flannel sheets for as low as $59.98. They won't last long, so get them while you can. The famous My Slippers, these haven't been on sale for over a year. They're regularly priced $119.98, but for a limited time, they are only $59.98. And the 6-piece towel sets are back in stock with limited quantities, only $29.98. With hundreds of MyPillow products, there's something for everyone on your Christmas list, from bathrobes, duvets, quilts, down comforters, and so much more. Go to MyPillow.com, or you can call 800-876-0227. The number again, 800-876-0227. Be sure to use promo code Dinesh to save on all MyPillow products. Flannel sheets as low as $59.98. The 6-piece towel set, $29.98. But that's not all. They're extending their 60-day money-back guarantee until March 1st, 2025, plus all orders $75 or more ship absolutely free. Guys, I'm back with the inimitable Kari Lake, leader of America First. Follow her on X at Kari Lake and the website karilake.com. Kari, I noticed that during your race, it looks like the intrepid gang at Turning Point got very involved from the beginning. Get out the vote, organizing young people. I noticed that even in the counting process, they were pretty involved in doing some of this chasing of ballots and things like that. Will you talk about the significance of independent groups like TPUSA? Because that appears to be a somewhat new factor on the horizon in American politics.
Yeah, I've got to give Charlie Kirk and my friend Tyler Boyer credit. Tyler Boyer, of course, of at Turning Point Action, which is the political leg of that organization. They walked the walk this time, and they were out there. Charlie was out there talking to and spreading the conservative message to college kids, and doing a great job waking them up to the fact that the Democrat Party doesn't care about them. The Democrat Party actually is pushing policies that will make their future bleak. And Charlie was waking those young people up. And Tyler was getting busy and very active on registering them to vote, getting voter registration going, also chasing the ballot. You know, we can't harvest ballots legally. Unfortunately, it's happening. We see it with some of these NGOs on the left. But we took every legal measure we had to chase ballots and make sure that every single person who received a ballot got that one sent back in a legal manner so that we had more participation when it came to voting. I'm incredibly impressed with the work they did. And they got young people involved. I went to a couple of their voter registration drives on college campuses and talked to fraternity brothers who, you know, we would go talk to a room of 150 fraternity boys, and they were all MAGA. And so I'm going to give a lot of credit to Charlie and Tyler Boyer, but I got to give all of the credit to a great leader like President Trump for pushing this America First movement that just resonated so wildly with the young people who were sick of being indoctrinated, sick of being told that if they're white, they're bad, sick of being told that their history is terrible, sick of being told that doing well and merit-based, ascending through merit-based accomplishments didn't matter anymore. It was all DEI. You know, they were just sick of all of it. It didn't make sense. And they were realizing that their future was going to be very, very dark if that continued. And so with the combination of Turning Point and President Trump's incredible agenda that they had to get to college campuses and explain, I think President Trump did a great job with young people. We did as well in our race.
Gary, one of the peculiar factors in Arizona is the role and the power of the cartels. I don't just mean the fact that the cartels are bringing people to the border, helping to traffic them across, and all the other criminal activity that goes with it. But I've heard that the cartels are also take a special interest, if you will, in the Arizona election because they have tremendous resources. And of course, it makes a great deal of difference to them whether the border is manned or not. Do you think that there is a way, either through Tom Homan or through the policies of a Trump administration, to sort of break the back of the cartels and prevent not only the bad stuff that they're doing at the border, but also cartel interference in the election in Arizona?
Well, let me make it very clear. They want the border manned, but they want the border manned with the cartel manning and controlling it. And I believe the cartels have operational control of our border. That's about to end with President Trump. And they care very much about who's elected into powerful roles in Arizona, because Arizona is really the gateway for all of the cartel activity. Obviously, we have Texas and we have New Mexico, but Arizona has the setup and is the gateway for fentanyl and drugs pouring in. With our interstate system, it's a perfect state for them to pour in their people. They've got a lot of people that I believe that they control in public office here. And they get the nod, and they bring their drugs in, and they do human smuggling and child trafficking right through Arizona. It's horrible what's happening in our state. And that's one of the reasons they had to stop me at any cost, at all costs, when I ran for governor, because I vowed that we were going to shut that operation down on day one. We were going to do it ourselves as a state. And they said, we can't have that woman in office because she will indeed put a dent in our business. It's a multi-billion-dollar business every year, as you know. So will President Trump take care of it? Absolutely. I know that President Trump will secure our border. I believe that he will help to topple the cartels, and I believe he'll work with Mexico to do that. It would be in Mexico's best interest to work with the president in order to do that. We want a thriving America. I hope to see Mexico thriving as well, but I want Mexico to be thriving with legitimate business, and we cannot allow a country to sit by idly and watch as cartels and these narco terrorists pump in millions of dollars, in hundreds of millions of dollars in dangerous, deadly drugs like fentanyl, the most dangerous drug we've ever seen in our country. bringing it into Arizona, and it's killing about 100,000 people a year. Can you imagine, Dinesh, if America was exporting a product into Mexico or Canada that was killing 100,000 Canadian citizens or Mexican citizens every year, how that would be received? And so it's going to be and require President Trump to come down hard on the cartels. At the same time, he's going to have to come down hard on the CCP, which is actually sending the precursors, the ingredients for these dangerous drugs into Mexico, shipping them in, and allowing these factories, these cartel-run factories, to manufacture these drugs and then send them into America to destabilize and take out and wipe out a young generation. It's going to stop, and I believe it will stop under the leadership of President Trump, with fighters like Tom Homan and Kristi Noem. Governor Noem is going to be taking a big part in that as well. And I want to make sure that President Trump is successful at taking down the cartels.
Kari, how are you thinking about your own plans in general terms? Are you focused on fixing things in Arizona? I mean, I got to say, I don't know anyone who can take the kind of attacks that the left throws at the America First movement, at President Trump, and dispatch them with the kind of easy sophistication that you bring to all this. I mean, you speak in a kind of lucid but very calm way, and you just absolutely decimate the attackers, but in a manner that almost makes them uncertain what really happened to them. And it seems to me that there has to be a perfect slot for you where you're able to sort of do your verbal jujitsu, either at the national level or at some level. I mean, you have these, I think, almost unique talents. Where are they best deployed? How do you think about your future at this point?
Well, thank you for that wonderful description. Sometimes I'm tongue-tied, but I try not to be, and I just use the skills that God gave me. This is the first time, Dinesh, as you know, many of you may know my story. About 3.5, 4 years ago, I walked away from a very lucrative job in the mainstream media. I was the #1 news voice in Arizona, making a fortune, and I just could not push the COVID propaganda. And frankly, the election propaganda that was being pushed. And I just said, I did not get into journalism because I'm an old school journalist. I didn't get into journalism to lie to people. I got into journalism to tell the truth and inform people. And so I walked away from that. And when I walked away from that, the people of Arizona were so blown away that I was stepping away and quitting a 7-figure contract in the midst of huge success, that they encouraged me to run for office. So I kind of accidentally ended up in politics. Never in my wildest imagination did I ever see myself entering politics. As a matter of fact, I used to say, I don't know who in their right mind would get into politics. It's so ugly. But we're at a moment in our history where it's incumbent on us to step up and get involved in politics. And so for the past 3.5, 4 years, I found myself in the middle of the political world. And I have not slowed down on that time. I've been running 100 miles an hour. And so I will say it's been a little bit nice to just stop, take a breath, and relax. I had Thanksgiving with my family. I didn't have to rush and be at a meeting or an event or a fundraiser. It was just nice to slow down a little bit. And so I'm enjoying a little bit of slow down time with my family. I'm about to head to Argentina to do a CPAC event, which I'm looking forward to. And I'm looking forward to the holidays and Christmas with my family. And then I'm going to make some big decisions on what my future looks like. I have a lot of options on which direction I go. I would love to help President Trump make America great again and make my state, Arizona, safe and secure again. And so I'm leaving a lot of options out there. It's very rare, Dinesh, to find yourself at a moment where you have a lot of possibilities, and any step that you take in any direction will send your life into a new trajectory. And so you want to make sure when you're at that moment, it's a pivotal moment, you don't rush in and take a step in the wrong direction. You look at all of the ideas and all of the options, you think about it, you pray, and then you take that step, because that next step you take is going to really change the trajectory of your life. So long story short, I haven't made up my mind what I'm doing next. but I'm enjoying a little bit of downtime and looking at all of the options, and then I'll make my next move.
Kari,
But I
that
will
seems
say
to
this.
be, yeah, go ahead.
Wait, I will say this. Hang on. I forgot the most important thing. I have taken a lot of hits, and I learned how to take those hits with grace from a friend of mine named Donald J. Trump. He's taken even more hits. I don't think there's anybody. He's had the media, the worst treatment by the media. I think I've had the second worst treatment by the media of just abject lies being spread every day, and the deep state very nervous about this middle-aged lady from Arizona. It's kind of humorous to think about. No matter what they say and do to me, I will not ever fall back. I will not ever quit. I will not ever stop fighting, and they will never be able to get rid of me. So if they're listening, I just want them to know there is no quit in Kari Lake, and I'm going to continue to push forward to help make our country safe again, to help make our elections secure and honest again, so that all voters, whether they're liberal or conservative or in between, can have faith in them. And that's going to be a goal and a mission as well.
Kari, that's great stuff, and we just look forward to hearing about the next steps that you take. And guys, I've been talking to Kari Lake. Her website, karilake.com. Follow her on X at Kari Lake. Kari, it's always a pleasure. Thank you very much for joining me.
Thank you, Dinesh. It was wonderful to be with you today.
I'm discussing the ideas of the philosopher of fascism, a man whose name is very far from being a household name. In fact, even educated people, by and large, in America and around the world, wouldn't recognize his name today, and yet he is one of the most famous people of his time. And his name is Giovanni Gentile. He was a close advisor to Mussolini. He was one of the founders of Italian fascism. Mussolini, by and large, echoed the ideas and words and slogans of Giovanni Gentile. And I pointed out yesterday that Gentile begins in a very sort of obvious way by talking about man in community, but then goes on to say that there are two types of democracy: liberal democracy, which he is against, and the other is the idea, and liberal democracy is that the state exists to serve the individual. Rights belong to individuals, and the state is the custodian or the enforcer of those rights. For Gentile, it's the opposite. The individual belongs to the state. The state is supreme. The state is a kind of stand-in for society. In other words, you'd like society as a whole to make decisions, but obviously society doesn't do anything by itself, and moreover, it's difficult to get full consensus in a society. And even if you did, society by itself doesn't have a kind of executive arm. It doesn't have someone to carry out the will of society. Imagine 1 million people, they're in society, they all agree, let's do this and let's do that, but who's going to actually do that? Well, according to Gentile, that is the state. And Gentile was a lifelong socialist. He was a socialist who comes out of Marxism, but also believes in a modified type of Marxism. For Gentile, fascism, this new thing, is an adapted version of socialism. It's a socialism that arises out of material deprivation. That's part of the revolt of the proletariat. It's a workers' movement. Gentile agrees. But he says that this awareness of the worker that he's exploited is also modified by a second idea, which is not native to socialism per se, and that is the idea of national consciousness. In other words, the worker says not merely, I am a victimized and exploited worker, but I am a victimized and exploited French worker, or I'm an exploited and victimized Italian worker. And so fascism is essentially socialism, but socialism mobilized at the level of a nation. And that's why, in fact, that's where we get the idea of National Socialism. Remember that Nazism is nothing more than a compressed version of the idea of National Socialism. Now, as with Marxism, Gentile sees fascism coming out of a kind of revolutionary struggle. But who is the struggle between? For Marx, the struggle is between the working class and the capitalists. And those are the two groups that are kind of fighting against each other. But for Gentile, it's not that. For Gentile, there is a struggle, but the struggle is between the selfish individual who just wants to live for himself, on the one hand, and the fully actualized individual who willingly puts himself at the behest of society and the state. So Gentile, in a sense, is saying there are two kinds of people, and there needs to be a moral struggle inside of you, so you liberate yourself from your selfish impulses. You don't care about your own rights. You subordinate yourself to society and to the state, and you derive whatever rights you have as gifts of the state. And interestingly, Gentile says that this process of going from one type of individual to another is not going to happen by itself. It needs to be cultivated, and it needs to be cultivated by scholars, by an education system, by an activist, organized group of people who raise the consciousness of people, and also by the state itself. Now, for Gentile, society and the state merge the one into the other. Basically, Gentile sees the centralized state as the necessary administrative arm of society. And moreover, he goes on to say that the state is, in a way, not accountable to citizens. He says, quote, "The authority of the state is not subject to negotiation. It is unconditioned. It could not depend upon the people. In fact, the people depend upon the state. Morality and religion," he says, "must be subordinated to the laws of the state." So when you listen to all this, you begin to realize this is all very familiar talk. We hear it now, that ultimately the federal government is supreme. The centralized state calls all the shots. Yes, you have the right to practice your own faith, but you've got to do so according to laws made by the state. So Gentile insists that citizens need to subordinate themselves to the state, not just in economic matters, by the way, but in all matters. There is no private sphere that is somehow unregulated by the state. And so here is Gentile's definition of fascism. He says, quote, "It is a total conception of life. One cannot be a fascist in politics and not a fascist in school, not a fascist in one's family, not a fascist in one's workplace." So he's talking about a generalized fascist consciousness. And when he uses this phrase, a total conception of life, that is the root of the phrase that we are now all familiar with, but at the time was completely unknown, totalitarianism. What does totalitarianism mean? Total control. Total control by who? The state. And it is almost strange for us today to look back and realize that this is a word, this is an idea that was invented by people who thought that it was a good thing. These are not people who defended themselves and said, "Oh no, we're not trying to be totalitarian." On the contrary, they said, "We are. Totalitarianism is a good thing." Why? Because otherwise the individual partially submits to this and partially submits to that. But here you give yourself wholly to the state, and the state in turn assumes total control over the lives of its citizens. And so totalitarianism is actually offered here without apology as something that is basically positive. Now, how do you achieve this totalitarianism? How do you achieve this total control? Here, Gentile recognized that the way to do that is that the government needs to be not just a lawmaker, but a kind of teacher. The government has to operate through schools, through the media. In other words, the government needs to be one giant, I don't think Gentile would say propaganda machine, although that's what it ended up being, one giant educational machine. It needs to bring all the sectors of society into sync with each other and into sync with the state. Now, later, the Germans and, of course, the Nazis had a phrase that described this process, the process of aligning the various institutions of society with the priorities of the Nazi state. And this phrase was a Gleichschaltung, which means literally coordination or working in sync or in harmony. And this was an idea that they got from Gentile. The phrase, of course, is German, but the idea is from Gentile. The idea of bringing everything into line, everything into harmony with each other. Here's Mussolini. All is in the state. Everything in the state. Nothing outside the state. Nothing above the state. This was Mussolini writing in La Dottrina del Fascismo, the doctrine of fascism. This is one of the doctrinal statements of early fascism, but the words came out of Mussolini's mouth. Who wrote them? Giovanni Gentile. So Gentile was a kind of ghostwriter, if you will, for Mussolini. And Mussolini admits this. Mussolini gives credit where credit is due. He says it was Gentile who prepared the road for those like me who wished to take it. So here is this guy, Giovanni Gentile. He served as a member of the Fascist Grand Council. He was a senator in the upper house of the Italian parliament. He was Mussolini's minister of education. And later, when Mussolini had been deposed out of Italy, but he then came back and he became the ruler of a part of Italy called Salo, Gentile became the president of the Italian Academy. Now, Gentile, let me say in conclusion, was in his own life, not a bad guy. And this, again, may seem odd to say, but what I mean is that he rejected anti-Semitism. He spoke out against it. He worked with Jews, even when this became somewhat controversial, when Mussolini was trying to ally himself with Hitler. Suddenly, anti-Semitism became a bigger issue in Italy. Gentile was consistently against it. He rejected many of the strong-arm tactics of fascism. He said, although the state is all-powerful, it should not be using force against its citizens. It should be using persuasion. It should be using argument. It should be cajoling them, not beating them up. And this is what Gentile called the tutelary or educational state. In 1944, Gentile was accosted in his apartment by members of a rival leftist faction who shot him at point-blank range. Mussolini promised to execute the killers, but Gentile's family urged that they be released, and somewhat surprisingly, Mussolini did so. This then was Giovanni Gentile, the philosopher of fascism. As I say, not an entirely bad guy, but of course the promulgator of some very bad doctrines that were later taken up by some truly evil men to the detriment of the world.
Subscribe to the Dinesh D'Souza podcast on Apple, Google, and Spotify, or watch on Rumble, YouTube, and SalemNow.com.